So, hello everybody. This is my presentation on transgender youth in the educational system, which is based on an undergrad project that I did for one of my classes. So, just a little content warning before I begin. I'm going to be discussing some suicide statistics at the start. If that's not what you need right now, that's totally chill. Just skip ahead like a minute. Also, in general, I will be discussing a lot about transphobia, bigotry, and harassment. So, just as a warning. So, why is it important to talk about trans people in schools? This is really important because of the high suicide attempt rate amongst trans people. 41% have attempted suicide, which is deeply concerning compared to 1.6% of the general population. This number actually rises to 51% for transgender people who are bullied or harassed in schools. So, what we are doing in schools is really affecting this community. While there are resources like the Trevor Project and Trans Lifeline, we need to be doing more for this population before it reaches this horrible point. According to the 2015 Transgender Survey, of those who were out as transgender in K-12 or who people thought were trans, 54% were verbally harassed because people thought they were trans, 52% weren't allowed to dress in a way that fit their gender identity or expression, 36% were disciplined for fighting back, and 77% faced multiple experiences that are listed here on this chart. So we can really see the wide variety of negative experiences trans people are facing in schools. Before I continue to talk about the difficulties trans people are facing in schools, I wanted to provide a little bit of background info on some terminology. So, gender identity is a person's internal personal sense of being a man, woman, or someone outside of that gender binary. So, what we would call non-binary. For transgender people, one's gender identity is different than the sex a doctor assigned you at birth. For cisgender people, one's gender identity matches the gender you were assigned at birth. Gender expression, on the other hand, is more in line with what we can see of a person and how they outwardly are expressing their gender. So, a very traditional concept of feminine gender expression would be a woman wearing makeup and a dress. Both of these differ from sexual orientation, which is simply about attraction. So, common sexual orientations would be heterosexual, gay, or bisexual. Um, I also kind of wanted to include a little bit of discussion on gender nonconforming people, which are simply people whose gender expression differs from what's expected of someone from their gender identity. So we would traditionally see this in something like a tomboy or a boy who really likes to wear dresses. These people, oops, sorry. Um, so these people might not actually be transgender, but can still face similar hardships that transgender people face. So now let's move on to some political context for all this. So last summer in Bostock v. Clayton, the Supreme Court determined that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which talks about sex discrimination related to employment, also protects against discrimination against gender identity and sexual orientation. When Biden took office, he put out an executive order very much continuing this concept into more areas than just employment law. So this may not seem like much, but these rights have been sort of back and forth. Back in the Obama administration, Obama did have guidance protecting gender identity in schools. However, the Trump administration rolled a lot of this guidance back. So it's nice to have this protection again under Biden, but it hasn't been as stable as it could have been. Additionally, just this last week, the House passed the Equality Act, which would again amend that 1964 Civil Rights Act to ban discrimination against LGBT people. But it's yet to pass the Senate, and also the House vote was incredibly on party lines. We're talking only like 3 Republicans voted for it. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about that Equality Act that just passed. So I don't have time to really read out either of these quotes, but I did want to talk about the situation concerning this picture here. So on the right, we have the office of Representative Mary Newman, who is a transgender daughter and hung a trans flag outside of her door. Then after, Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Republican, posted a sign outside her door saying, "There are only 2 genders, male and female, trust the science." The two then had a very public Twitter spat surrounding all of this, especially related to the Equality Act, with Marjorie Taylor Greene also specifically insulting Representative Newman's daughter. And I think this really highlights how difficult this situation is, even in the political sphere. So now I wanted to discuss some issues that trans people are facing specifically in schools again. So first on the issues is how we're representing this group in schools. So there's outing, where someone reveals a person is LGBT without the person's consent. This may not always be done with a negative intent. However, disclosing that someone is transgender to another person uh, can be dangerous, especially if the trans person was planning on coming out in a specific way or hadn't told that person for a reason of safety. We also have misgendering, which is to refer to someone by the wrong gender or pronouns, and then dead naming, which is using a trans person's birth name, especially if that's no longer the name that they're using for themselves. Moving on, trans people also face difficulties with dress codes. So, school dress codes often fall into three categories: supportive fluid gender expression, yet not overt support, meaning um, having a dress code that is supportive of men wearing traditionally female clothes, but it doesn't explicitly say like boys are cool wearing skirts, by the way. It just doesn't outright ban it. Um, Two, passive marginalization of gender nonconforming and transgender people. And then three, active marginalization of gender nonconforming and trans people. So, for an example of this active marginalization of trans students with dress codes, we have the case recently last October of Sine Martinez in Texas, who's a trans woman, and she wanted to go to school in the female dress code. So she was in compliance with the female dress code, but still wasn't permitted to do so. I've included a quote from her and also a quote from her school district superintendent. Um, if you look at the superintendent quote, it really serves to highlight how little it appears that the school district views her as a girl. You can note that the superintendent misgenders Sine Martinez throughout. Additionally, the article that I got this from and most articles surrounding this instance included Sine's dead name, even though it was in nowhere relevant to this discussion on dress codes. Now I wanted to move on to bathrooms, which is a very public and contentious issue. So, according to the 2015 transgender survey, 59% of transgender people reported that in the past year, they'd either sometimes 48% or always 11% avoided using a restroom, either in public, at work, or at school, because they were afraid of confrontations or other problems. So, this can lead to medical problems. 8% of people in that same survey reported that because of this, they either had UTI problems or kidney problems. And Robert Garofalo, division head of adolescent medicine at Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago, even noted that when transgender and gender nonconforming children refrain from going to the bathroom, it puts them at an increased risk for urinary tract infections and constipation, um, which is really no good at all. Additionally, trans people like 16-year-old Grace Dolan Sandrino mentioned that feeling different from their peers due to not being allowed to use the same bathroom as their cisgender peers. So this bathroom issue is even present here at FAU. I am a non-binary person myself, and if I was doing this presentation right now in the College of Ed and I needed to go to a gender-neutral bathroom, the nearest bathroom for me would be a few buildings away in the computer center. Um, Additionally, at FAU's Davie campus, FAU has no gender neutral bathrooms whatsoever. There are 3 gender neutral bathrooms on that campus, but all of them are in the Broward College section. And if you know kind of how that campus is set up, it would all be kind of a walk. So now we're moving on to sports. So the debate of trans people in sports is very similar in many ways to the debate with bathrooms. And okay, so are we going to split people by sex or are we splitting by gender? Various communities can get upset with trans women competing with cis women in sports. I'm sure you've all seen articles and discussions related to this. Um, but in other cases, these same people can get upset when sports are split by sex instead of gender, and then trans men are competing in women's sports with cis women. So for a case of this, we have Mac Beggs, who's a trans man on testosterone, but due to his birth certificate, was required to play with the girls wrestling team. So in this quote here, even he talked about this hypocrisy in breaking sports in by sex assigned at birth. So now I wanted to move on to what we as educators can do about all this. So I think first is to really push for laws and school policies that are specifically supportive of transgender students. A lot of these protections need to be explicit, especially since this is such a hot button issue. In our classrooms, we also need to be creating a positive environment for our transgender students. You should be asking your students for their name and pronouns and using them. There's a variety of ways to get this info from students. I've listed out a few of them here, but really I just wanted to emphasize that when we're asking this, we should be asking all of our students for their names and pronouns, not just simply ones that we think are transgender. Otherwise, it can very much feel like you're singling out the transgender students. So just make this a standard practice in your classroom, regardless of whether or not you think there are students in your classroom who are trans. We also need to be also need to avoid dividing the classroom by sex. So there's a lot of other ways you can divide a classroom. You can do cats versus dogs, birthdays in the first half of the school year versus in the second half of the year. Or what I like to call kind of the PE teacher method, where you just go down a line and you say A, B, A, B, A, B. Um, in our lessons, we also need to acknowledge gender diversity in the existence of trans people. So there are many cases in different lessons where it might be natural to acknowledge this existence. And we should be doing this throughout all of our lessons, not just lessons and units specifically on trans people. Trans people exist in wider society, gender exists, and we need to be discussing this naturally and not making it like a special one-off type deal. So there might be some instances where it's inevitable to use a person's legal name or dead name, such as on report cards or other legal documents at schools. This can really vary by school. At FAU, all diplomas must have a person's legal name on them. However, this is not the case at all for all universities, and this is not a case in Broward County Public Schools with their high school diplomas. Um, it might also be inevitable to refer to a child by their legal name with their parents, especially if the child's not out to their parents. So in these cases, we should work with the trans student to see exactly how that student wishes for this case to be handled, rather than making any judgment call on our own. We should always be deferring to that child. Um, So just in general, as educators, if a student comes to us with an issue, especially a trans student, we need to be dealing with the issue in some manner. So one survey on LGBTQ plus youth in schools found that 60.5% of students who reported an incident of harassment or assault said that staff did nothing or told the students to ignore it, which is deeply concerning. We also need to be making sure our schools have policies that specifically address LGBTQ populations. Um, some of these policies might include having a GSA on campus, but we also need to be going beyond just having a GSA on campus and having an LGBTQ friendly school climate as a whole. For my last slide here, I just have some additional terminology that I kind of wanted to talk about. I don't think I fully have enough time with my time limit to talk about all of this, but you can pause and read it. Just discussing more terms like assigned female at birth, assigned male at birth, and then also making some mention of intersex people and how that really shakes up our concept of even sex being a binary type thing. So thank you so much for your time. Have a good day.